and welcome back to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror, the card game. I'm your host Brandon, and today I'll be talking through the player cards from the expansion The Depths of Yoth, Mythos pack number 5 in the Forgotten Age cycle. The Depths of Yoth has a total of 12 new player cards, with a 5-7 split between level 0 cards and leveled up cards. The leveled up cards range in level from 2 up to 5, but the majority come in at level 3. Let's go ahead and dive into the individual cards, and I'm going to start this look with the Rogue class. Rogues are tied with neutral for having the most cards in Depths of Yoth, with 3. Our first card is a new level 0 weapon asset, Cult Vest Pocket. 2 resources, so it's nice and cheap. It fills 1 hand slot, item, weapon, firearm, and illicit traits. Uses 5 ammo. Spend 1 ammo and an action to fight. You get +1 combat for this attack. This attack deals +1 damage, but forced, at the end of the round, discard Cult Vest Pocket. I am not too crazy about this card. This is the game's 4th level 0 rogue weapon, joining Switchblade, Derringer, and Knuckle Duster. Switchblade and Derringer both have the drawback that they only deal bonus damage when you succeed by 2 or more. So what Cult Vest Pocket has going for it is that it's a reliable way to pull 2 damage hits in this faction without having to worry about succeeding by a margin of 2. But it's got a pretty significant drawback. After you play it, it's going to disappear at the end of the round. On top of that, it doesn't have the fast keyword, so it's awkward really even getting it into play when you need it. You can't play it ahead of time, so if you need it for an enemy engaged with you, you're looking at an attack of opportunity just to get it in play, unless you can cheat it out at fast speed with either sleight of hand or fence. It's not an issue if the enemy is engaged with someone else, or if you can evade the enemy first, but unless you're Finn, if you're evading them, then that's going to eat into the actions that you're going to have to actually fire this weapon. Sleight of Hand works, but I feel like there are better uses for Sleight of Hand. That's a card that's usually pretty valuable to me. And Fences may be fine if you were already using Fence, but I doubt you'd want to go out of your way and run Fence just to enable this. I guess there's also Narrow Escape to just cancel the attack of opportunity when you play the Cult. But like Sleight of Hand, there are probably better uses for Narrow Escape, and playing the gun as an action still leaves you with 1 fewer action to actually fire the thing. It also has a weirdly high ammo count for a 1-turn weapon, though I guess there are worse things than having unnecessary extra ammo. But you probably won't be using all 5 of its shots unless you're running cards that grant you extra actions, which in Rogue you very well may be. It all seems like a lot to have to work around just to get to a cheaper 45 automatic, so I don't know. I think if you have a method of getting it into play, maybe it could work as a placeholder until you work up to a higher level weapon to take its place, but long term I don't think this is a card that you want in your deck. Up next we have a new level 0 rogue event, Coup de Grace. 2 resources, tactic, and faded traits. Deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location. If this effect defeats that enemy, draw 1 card. If it's your turn, end your turn. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity, and the card also has double combat icons. This card is sort of a mirror image to the Guardian event Mano a Mano. Mano a Mano is bold and has to be played as the first action of your turn, while Coup de Grace is faded and wants to be played as the last remaining action on your turn. Both do that 1 point of test-free damage, though Coup de Grace has the extra advantages of drawing you that card if it kills something, and also not requiring you to be engaged with the target. Is it a coincidence that both cards have foreign language names? I think that it probably is. Test-free damage is often very useful, but I have some concerns about the timing on this one. It seems to me that 1 point of damage at the end of the turn is going to be harder to make efficient use of than 1 point of damage at the beginning of the turn. On a 3 health enemy, if you do a mano, then 1 attack, assuming you have a +1 damage weapon handy, then that kills the enemy, and then you're free to roam about the cabin for your 3rd action. With Coup de Grace, you could still dispatch a 3 health enemy in 2 actions, but your spare 3rd action is going to come while the enemy is still alive and potentially engaged with you. So you have to consider how you're avoiding an attack of opportunity there. One answer might be that the enemy is engaged with someone else, or maybe the enemy is aloof, and if you've got a 1 health aloof enemy to deal with, then this could be a very handy way to do that, and you might consider sliding this in with Adaptable before a scenario where you know there's going to be an enemy like that. And if you're Finn, you can probably afford to just evade the enemy first. I think this card is probably worth the slots in some decks and on some difficulty settings, and of course, as always, the double combat icons on the card certainly help justify running it. Our 3rd and final rogue card in this pack is a really neat one. The Skeleton Key is a level 2 exceptional asset. It's unique, costs 3 resources, item, relic, and cursed traits. It's fast, action, and I'm going to read you the updated version of this action with the official errata from the last FAQ. Action, if the skeleton key is in your play area, attach it to your location. If it's already attached to your location, detach it and return it to your play area instead. Set the attached location's shroud value to 1. The errata was necessary to make this work the way it's intended to work. To move it, you're supposed to have to go to its location and pick it up, then move somewhere else and then reattach it. Under the printed wording that just said attach skeleton key to your location, since an investigator is permitted to use triggered abilities on any card in play under their control, you could use the ability to reattach it to your current location no matter where it was located at the time. So if it was already attached somewhere else, you could just teleport it to your current location, so the errata fixes that loophole or that error. Another sort of rules note on this, setting a value does override any other modifiers, unless it says base value, which this does not. So if, say, the Obscuring Fog Treachery and Skeleton Key were both attached to the same location, that location's shroud value would still be 1, not 3. Same goes for player card effects that would reduce shroud, like for example Flashlight. That'll keep you from combining other effects with this to get the shroud of a location down to 0. Otherwise, this would have been a great combination with Lantern, which reduces the shroud value by 1. It does combo nicely with Lola Santiago. It makes it really cheap to buy the clue off the location using her ability. I think this is a really cool card. We've had a lot of new relics this cycle, but I think this one is one of my favorites. It's a reusable way to drag shroud values down, with the main drawback being that it's somewhat time-consuming if you want to keep moving it around. I like how that plays well with the additional actions theme of the rogue class. If you've got Leo DeLuca, then maybe you can afford to divert more of your actions to shifting this card around the map. So I think this is really cool. It's one more card to add to the ever-growing list of cards that I'd like to try building around sometime in the near future. Moving on now to the Guardian class, where we get 2 new cards. Handcuffs is a level 0 asset that costs 2 resources. It doesn't occupy any slots. It has the item and police traits, and I'm going to go ahead and mark down 1 mental trauma for myself due to the fact that this card has the police trait, but police badge does not. I'm starting to think the badge probably came from Party City. Anyway, the ability here reads, Action, if Handcuffs is not attached to an enemy, evade. Use only on a humanoid enemy. This evasion attempt uses combat instead of agility. If you succeed, attach Handcuffs to the just evaded enemy. If the attached enemy is non-elite, it cannot ready and doom cannot be placed on it. So for a non-elite enemy, this is going to exhaust them basically for the rest of the game. I might be forgetting something, but I can't think of anything that would cause this to get detached. Note that if you do fail the test, you can always try again until it does land and get attached to an enemy. And you can still use this to evade an elite enemy using your combat stat. It just won't stop the enemy from readying or receiving doom afterwards, which could still be useful at times. I really like this card. We previously had the card Bind Monster, which was able to neutralize an enemy without killing it, but it always carried that risk that the enemy could escape it, and that always kept me away from that card. If this one works, though, the enemy should truly be out of play. It's a little more restrictive, with it only working on humanoid enemies, but that's not at all an uncommon trait. Though on the other hand, humanoid enemies do tend to be a little easier to just kill off. My favorite part of Handcuffs, though, is that someone pointed out that after an enemy is evaded with this, it's possible to re-engage the enemy using an action, at which point it would be engaged with you, but would still never ready unless some card effect readied it. So you can drag your handcuffed enemy around the map like a hostage, and they're not going to be able to strike back at you, which is not only a humorous mental image, but also has some interactions with cards like Not Without a Fight or Trench Knife. With a hostage and another enemy to fight, Trench Knife becomes a +2 combat weapon. Still no bonus damage, but may be useful for saving ammo when you only need to do 1 on a hit. You can also lead them around the map and make them confess to things with Scene of the Crime, so I think this card has a neat effect, great flavor, and I'm glad to have it in the card pool. Our other Guardian card in Depths of Yoth is Blood Eclipse. Blood Eclipse is a level 3 event that costs 1 resource. It has the spell and spirit traits. It's actually the game's first Guardian spell. As an additional cost to play Blood Eclipse, take up to 3 damage. Fight. This attack uses willpower instead of combat. You get +1 willpower and deal +1 damage for this attack for each damage taken as part of this card's cost. So if you choose to take the full 3 damage, you can get a 4 damage attack with a +3 willpower boost. In general, I enjoy playing burst damage events like this one. I'm thinking of Backstab and I've Got a Plan. I find both of those useful and I run them reasonably often. I think for some investigators Blood Eclipse is going to be worthwhile too. I especially like that it's just one resource. That makes it much easier to afford than Backstab or I've Got a Plan, which both cost 3. You are going to have to figure out how to manage that damage, which I think will be a roadblock for some investigators. The other big drawback is the fact that it costs 3 experience, and there's plenty in Guardian competing for that experience. The fact that it shifts the attack to willpower, depending on your investigator, that may or may not be an advantage, but the potential +3 willpower boost I think at least keeps it viable even for Guardians with average willpower scores. You may just have to invest a skill card in it. This seems like it was probably designed with Calvin in mind. Thanks to the Spirit trait, it's a card that he can take. His builds are probably suited to taking that damage, and he may even want to take some of it on himself just to start boosting up his stats. There's only one Mystic card in this pack, and that card is a level 4 version of Mists of Arlier, which originally appeared in level 0 form in the Forgotten Age Deluxe box. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing Arlier correctly. I, before recording this, just typed it into YouTube and watched about 20 seconds of the first video that came up. That's the way that video pronounced it, which was about 180 degrees from the way I had been saying it up to that point. So, just kind of comes with the territory of recording videos about Arkham Horror the card game. Occasionally you run into these crazy fantasy words that you have no idea how to pronounce. But anyway, basically 4 experience here buys you 1 extra charge, 5 instead of 4, and a +3 willpower boost to the test. The original version was a straight willpower test with no boosts. The level 4 version also gains a willpower icon, and there's no other change to the effect, just that +3 willpower. So as upgrades go, it's straightforward but practical. The +3 here should help you reliably land those higher difficulty evasion tests. The experience cost does feel a little steep, maybe, but Arcane Research or Double Arcane Research is going to be a big help there. If you are using the level 0 version of Mists, then I think that this is going to be a worthwhile upgrade for you, especially if you're one of the 4 willpower mystics. The Seeker class also just gets 1 card in this pack. Theirs is Feed the Mind, a level 3 spell asset. 2 resources to play, occupies a spell slot, uses 3 secrets. As an action, you can exhaust Feed the Mind and spend 1 secret to test Intellect at 0 difficulty. For each point you succeed by, you draw 1 card. Then you take 1 horror for each card in your hand in excess of your maximum hand size. So this has the power to draw you a big burst of cards, or maybe 3 big bursts, but with the drawback that you never want to activate this unless your hand is fairly depleted on account of the horror that it might deal out. I sort of like this card, but I will admit that it's narrow. Most Seekers looking to draw cards are likely to be better served by good old Cryptic Research, or maybe by Return to the Dunwich Legacy's upcoming upgraded version of Preposterous Sketches, but you might want Feed the Mind if you think it's likely you'll be dropping down to a low hand size often, which, due in part to higher education, I think most Seekers try to avoid. But I had a Min deck with Amnesia as its basic weakness in my blind playthrough of Path to Carcosa, and I wonder if this might have been a good way for that deck to recover after that weakness hit. Min in particular is an investigator who could be built to really burn through cards, and I could see this being a good tool for her. And you know, maybe you're just bored of using higher education. So again, I think I like this card in the right deck, but I'll admit that it's not going to be for everyone. We've got 2 Survivor cards in this pack, the first of which is Winging It. This is a level 0 event with the Tactic and Improvise traits. 1 resource, you may play Winging It from your discard pile. If you do, shuffle it into your deck after resolving its effects. Investigate, your location gets -1 Shroud for this investigation. If you played Winging It from your discard pile, discover 1 additional clue if you succeed. We got 3 of these improvised Survivor events over the course of the Forgotten Age cycle that could be played from the discard pile with an improved version of their basic effect. Improvised Weapon was for fighting, Winging It is for investigating, and Impromptu Barrier was for evading. I think this one is the only one of the 3 that really landed for me. The other 2 I'm just not that keen on, but I generally like playing events and skills that gain extra clues like this, and as long as I had a way to get this into the discard pile without playing it from hand, like for example either Wendy's Investigator ability or the cornered asset maybe, I think I'd be happy to run Winging It. I do think having another way to get this into your discard pile is important, because the played from hand effect is pretty lackluster, though not entirely useless, and the card doesn't have any skill icons that would let you just pitch it into a test. Our other Survivor card in this pack is Old Hunting Rifle, a level 3 weapon asset. This is actually our first high-level Survivor weapon, which makes it unique in its class. Resource cost of 3, item, weapon, and firearm traits. It occupies 2 hand slots. Uses, 3 ammo. Action, spend 1 ammo to fight. You get +3 combat and deal +2 damage for this attack. If a skull or autofail symbol is revealed during this attack, the rifle jams. This attack automatically fails. Before you can activate this ability again, you must perform the following ability. Action, you clear the jam. Raspberry. This one calls back to a Survivor theme we first saw back in the core set with Baseball Bat, the unreliable weapon. This is definitely a cool bit of theming, and I like how it's presented in a way that blends the rules text and the flavor text together. As far as the card itself, I don't think it's great, but as I said, right now it's the only Survivor option for a big weapon, and I think it's okay enough that it will see play. I'm kind of interested to see this in a William Yorick deck. He's always been cut out of the nice high-level Guardian weapons like Lightning Gun, but I think having a big two-handed gun would be interesting for him. Not only can he replay the rifle from his discard pile with his ability, but he also has access to some of the Guardian ammo gain tools like Venturer that can help him keep this loaded. And when Venturer runs out, he can let it die and replay it, so he could really keep the rifle going that way. I'll probably give that pairing a try sometime soon. Not that I needed an excuse to make yet another Yorick deck. He's kind of become one of my go-to investigators. And finally, we come to the neutral cards, which Depths of Yoth has a high count of. There are 3 of them here. The first one we'll look at is Thermos. This is a 4-resource, level 0 item asset. Uses, 3 supplies. It has 2 different actions you can use. Action 1 is to spend 1 supply and exhaust Thermos to heal 1 damage from an investigator at your location, or 2 damage instead if he or she has 2 or more physical trauma. Or option 2, spend 1 supply and exhaust Thermos to heal 1 horror from an investigator at your location, or 2 horror instead if he or she has 2 or more mental trauma. And it doesn't occupy any slots. So this is an experience-free, open-to-anybody way to try to manage your trauma or a teammate's trauma. And note that it is now possible to have 2 mental trauma from the very get-go if you've taken double arcane research. As a neutral card, I wouldn't expect this to be on the same level as, say, a Guardian healing card, but that 4 resource cost does seem pretty steep. So hopefully this is some very good soup that you're getting in this Thermos. I've actually refused to allow myself to look too closely at the Thermos and the artwork here, because I'm afraid I'm going to see something unsettling floating around in there, like an eyeball, sort of like that Jeff Lee Johnson diner art piece from the Investigators of Arkham book. That's probably just vegetables in there, though. I really don't see myself getting too much use out of this card at this price. Maybe if you had a cash-rich investigator, they wouldn't mind this so much. Jenny or Preston maybe could bring this in with Adaptable after they've suffered enough trauma, but I think most investigators are going to have better options, and so I don't expect this to see a ton of play. Up next, we have the first of 2 neutral relics in this pack. Hemispheric Map is a level 3 relic asset that occupies the accessory slot, 2 resources to play. While your current location is connected to at least 2 other locations, you get +1 willpower and +1 intellect. If it's connected to at least 4 other locations, you get an additional +1 willpower and +1 intellect. Without doing a study on this, my guess is that the second bonus is going to be pretty hit and miss. Some scenarios may not have any qualifying locations, some may have a few, and often when there is a central hub that's got a lot of connections, it doesn't have any clues of its own, so the intellect bonus isn't going to be all that useful on those. I guess the willpower still could be. Maybe if you're working to get rid of a treachery that takes a willpower test to discard, then you could shuffle back to the hub beforehand just to raise your willpower bonus, but I think this mainly needs to be judged on the 2 connection bonus, which is likely to be on a decent amount of the time. And note that unlike Otherworldly Compass, the locations don't have to be revealed for this one. +1 willpower and +1 intellect is a pretty good bonus for a 2-resource accessory. St. Hubert's Key is pretty well liked, and it gives that boost for 4 resources. That extra cost on the key is probably worth it to avoid having to worry about counting connections, so I expect if you have access to the key, you might not be interested in this, but for the classes that don't, this might prove useful enough. Campaign knowledge is probably really useful with this too. Ideally, you know which scenario maps are going to have well-connected locations and which aren't, so you can kind of time your purchase of the map to get the most out of it. And last but not least, we have Timeworn Brand, a level 5 neutral melee weapon that's also a relic. 5 resources to play, occupies 1 hand slot, it has 2 different actions on it. The first, which is kind of the basic use, says Action. If Timeworn Brand is ready, fight, you get +2 combat and deal +1 damage for this attack. Then there's a second, special one-time use ability, Action, exhaust Timeworn Brand, fight, add your willpower to your skill value for this attack. This attack deals +3 damage. If this attack defeats an elite enemy, draw 3 cards. max once per game, and that limit is to the whole ability, not just the card draw part, and the word max means that limit applies across all copies of this card, across all players, so even if you replay another copy of this later in the scenario, or someone else plays their copy, you're locked out of using that second ability a second time. We get a level 5 neutral card about once a cycle, usually in the last pack, so this one's a little early. Dunwich had the Red-Gloved Man, who I don't think made a very big splash outside of maybe William York decks. Carcosa had the Key of Ys, which had quite a bit more impact, to the point where some would say it went a little too far in its power level. Timeworn Brand, I think, lands at a pretty nice spot. The basic effect is a nice, reliable strike that doesn't require ammo. It's good, but it doesn't feel out of line with where a level 5 neutral weapon should be, especially for the resource cost of 5, and it leaves plenty of space for a level 5 Guardian melee weapon to be much better. Then you get that single-use secondary ability for a 4 damage hit, and potentially 3 cards, if you can find an elite enemy to strike down. It's somewhat scenario dependent, but I think that ability kind of contributes to the special feeling that a level 5 neutral card should have. I like the card, it's useful, but as I've said here, I don't think it's overpowered. It feels appropriately balanced for a high-level neutral card. It's not going to turn a character who's bad at combat into Rambo. I also like that it ties into the themes of the cycle. You can kind of see some obsidian along the sides of this thing, which I think is a feature that was common on actual Aztec weaponry, so that's a cool little detail. Overall, this card gets a pretty good thumbs up from me. And that's it for the Depths of Yoth player cards. On the whole, I'd rate the player card side of this pack as fair to good. The standout cards for me are probably the Skeleton Key and Timeworn Brand, but there were several other cards here that I think should work out to be useful. I hope you enjoyed this look. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the Forgotten Age.